This bathroom was much larger than the other, containing a standalone shower and a jetted tub on the right, and his and hers sinks on the left, with a large mirror that stretched across the wall. He started in the shower, enjoying the menagerie of scents of men's and women's soaps, and even tasting the vanilla bean body wash that Hannah often used. When he moved to the sinks and counter, he was careful to avoid the mirror before him. He hated mirrors, not because he was afraid of what he might see, but because of what he felt they represented. They were the embodiment of vanity and mask-making. As far as mirrors were concerned, every day was Halloween. They were tools used to falsify who a man was. They were liars. Only on his vacations could Edgar see and understand that which the mirror and its users did not. Between the two sinks, it was apparent which belonged to Eric and which belonged to Hannah. The sink on the left was surrounded by a handful of items consisting of hand soap, contact solution, a contact case, cologne, and deodorant. The sink on the right was more orderly, but had easily double the amount of hygiene products ranging from 3 different bottles of lotion, a curling iron, and a diamond ring next to the faucet. Edgar picked the ring up and held it against the light between his thumb and forefinger. The ring glistened softly before him, the large diamond and the 2 smaller stones on either side whispering soft secrets to Edgar. He couldn't believe his luck. There was no doubt that this was Hannah Osborne's wedding ring. He'd seen her wearing it before, although he had noticed times when she'd carelessly forgotten it at home. Taking it would be a bold move, but it was worth the risk. Watching her frantically search the house for it would give Edgar immeasurable pleasure. Would she cry? Would she cry? Would she scream at her children for losing it? He hoped so. He hoped to see the full spectrum of emotion before his stay at the Osborne house was over. He placed the ring in his mouth and rolled it around his cheeks like a jawbreaker. It tasted salty and metallic, but to Edgar there was more than that. It tasted bittersweet, like a marriage that, after 22 years, had lost its spark. Perhaps if he sucked on it long enough, the flavor would change like other jawbreakers did. Edgar hoped so. With the ring still in his cheek, Edgar re-entered the bedroom and slithered between the sheets on the bed. From that vantage point, he noticed that the couple had installed a large mirror above their bed. He caught a glimpse of a large man with hard features that looked like carved granite lying in the couple's bed. He immediately closed his eyes and didn't open them until he was out of the bed. Edgar hated being lied to, and what he saw, the face staring back at him, was not who he was. Eric and Hannah Osborne began and ended every day with a lie, and as he made the bed and left the room, Edgar found himself more disgusted with the Osborne family than he ever had before. He only paused once on his way out to snatch a pair of black dress pants that Eric wore the day before from the hamper. Back in the hallway, Edgar neatly folded the slacks and collected the other items he'd left on the floor of their former owner's bedrooms. He placed the blouse, action figure, pants, and after a moment's hesitation, the ring from his mouth, in a neat pile and carried them to the kitchen, where he collected the food on the counter. Careful not to spill his bounty, Edgar carried the pile to the bedroom at the end of the hall where he'd be staying. This bedroom belonged to Christopher Osborne. At 23, Chris was the oldest of the Osborne children, but outside of pictures, Edgar had never seen him. A year earlier, Chris was deployed to Afghanistan by the United States Marine Corps. At 18, Chris had enlisted right after high school and had apparently done quite well for himself there. He enjoyed the benefits of going to college on the government's dime until a year and a half ago when he got the phone call calling him to duty. The family obviously struggled with his absence, but none more than the boy's mother. This was apparent by her reluctance to enter her son's room. It was almost as if the room did not exist, except for the time Edgar had seen Jason enter it for a total of 4 minutes before his mother was upon him, threatening groundings from there to high school. Balancing his new possessions and supplies in his left arm, Edgar extended his right hand and opened the door. The room before him was outstandingly tidy, as if it had never once been lived in if he didn't know better. Edgar may have thought this was a guest room, instead the bedroom of a 23-year-old. The only indications that this room wasn't a guest room were the two photographs on the nightstand. One was of the entire Osborne family on a fishing trip, a smaller copy of a print hanging in the living room, and a picture of Chris in his Marine's uniform. Edgar entered the bedroom and sat on the foot of the bed, placing his pile next to his feet on the floor. His heart began to race the moment he stepped through the threshold of the room, but outwardly he held the same calm disposition. In all the years he'd been taking these vacations, he'd only had a small handful of opportunities to sleep on an actual bed, let alone get his own room, often resorting to attics or basements, but his excitement went deeper than that. This room was thick with emotion that was almost palpable. It was where the family stored their concern for Chris and their hope for his safe return. This room was particularly full now because Chris had not sent his weekly letters for the past month. Without warning, the letters just stopped coming. Hannah and Eric had both called to see if he was all right, but trying to squeeze information out of the U.S. military was like trying to squeeze juice out of a boulder. The letters wouldn't abruptly stop if everything was all right. The Osbornes knew it, and Edgar knew it. He was going to be sleeping in the bed of a dead man. Edgar stood from the bed and walked along the side, then proceeded to take the pillowcases off the two pillows at the head of the bed. If he was going to sleep here, it would have to be without sheets or pillowcases. A freshly shaved head prevented him from leaving any stray hairs around the house. He wore an expensive black toupee when he wasn't vacationing, but he knew the human body was covered in dead skin, and there was a chance, however slim, that he could drool in his sleep as well. The likelihood of a forensic team getting DNA from the bed was extremely low, but he saw no point in risking it if stripping it clean of sheets could make that problem all but disappear. With the bed sheets folded on the floor, Edgar lay down in the middle of the mattress and closed his eyes. He would sleep for a few more hours and then prepare himself for the return of the Osborne family. Of course, there were several hours before he felt the need to even be concerned, but experience had taught him that luck favors the prepared. Edgar's eyes flew open. Something was wrong. His watch informed him he'd been asleep for only 47 minutes. So why was he awake? Something must have awoken him, but what? He stood from the bed and moved cautiously to the door. A robotic woman's voice announced front door open, followed by the familiar chirping of the security system. Edgar tracked a pair of footsteps from the front door to the kitchen. Then the security system fell silent. A few more footsteps, then the faint sound of the refrigerator opening. Edgar mused briefly that this was very similar to how it sounded when he entered the house earlier, although he knew his footfalls were far quieter. As he listened to the newcomer move around the house, Edgar considered who it could be. He hadn't heard the garage open, nor had the person come through the garage entrance off the dining room, so this couldn't be Eric or Hannah. Jason was out of the question, and after a moment of consideration, he ruled Kimmy out as well. The footsteps were too heavy and deliberate to be a child or teenaged girl. Just as he began to consider the possibility of a neighbor or relative, or the possibility that he might run into a burglar about to have a very bad time for ruining his vacation, the sound of shoes on the wood floor began to grow louder. The stranger was coming down the hall. Instinct took over, as it often did, and Edgar moved away from the door. The intruder was going to enter the room in which Edgar now stood. He could never determine how exactly he knew these things, considering there were at least 3 other doors between him and the new arrival, but he knew nonetheless. As he crossed the room, he scooted his pile of possessions with his foot into concealment under the bed. He opened the closet, which had 2 doors with horizontal slats, and climbed in. Maneuvering over shoes and between clothes, he curled himself into a ball in the back left corner. If the left door was opened, he would be totally exposed, but if the right door was opened, he at least stood a chance of maintaining his secrecy. Edgar was in his position for no more than 2 heartbeats before the door opened. From between the slats in the closet doors, Edgar's vision was limited to the shapes of shadows. He watched the silhouette dance across the closet doors, growing faintly larger and smaller, as the stranger moved about the room. Something heavy, a backpack perhaps judging from the sound, hit the floor by the closet. Rustling fabric and the squeak of the mattress springs painted the image of the stranger making the bed that Edgar had just cleared off. At this, Edgar was now swelling with intense intrigue, racking his brain for any explanation of this strange scene. A visiting relative could know the code to the security alarm and would probably know that Chris's room was unoccupied if they were the kind of family member close enough to drop by for an unexpected visit, which was exactly what this was, unexpected. Edgar had been incredibly thorough, so it seemed impossible that the Osborns would expect a house guest that he did not. Eric had a younger brother in Cheyenne that called every week. He was married, but maybe he and his wife had gotten into another fight, as they had been known to do, according to the Osborn family dinner conversations, and his wife had finally given him the boot. And with nowhere else to go, he came here. With news like that, some people preferred to talk in person rather than call ahead, and as often as the 2 men talked, it wasn't out of the question that his brother would feel comfortable with that decision. If that were the case, then Edgar had a couple hours to get rid of him before the Osborns came home and reclaim the bed he had been looking forward to. Climbing out of the closet at that moment was out of the question. The possibility of catching his foot on a rogue shoe and falling out of the closet was too great. Eric's brother Kevin would have an open chance for a free shot at Edgar if he weren't too startled or bolting out of the house before Edgar regained his footing, both of which would cause for an early end to his vacation. No, he would need to wait until he left the room. Then Edgar could silently climb out of the closet and prepare himself for a confrontation. Fortunately, Edgar was as patient as a saint. He listened to the man make the bed for a few minutes. Then, just as Edgar expected him to leave the room to watch television or do something to keep himself occupied until his brother's family came home, he heard the bed frame creak in protest as the man lay down in the freshly made bed instead. Edgar sighed silently in irritation. With luck, Kevin would fall asleep quickly, or else Edgar would have to stay in the closet, waiting for an opportunity to leave. He'd been in far tighter spaces in more stressful conditions at least a dozen times before that he could readily recall, so he resolved to count his blessings and prepare himself for the possibility that he'd be stuck in the closet for the next few hours. 2 hours passed before Edgar felt confident in leaving his place in the closet. He'd been listening intently to the man's breathing, waiting until it slowed and deepened. Then he waited a half hour after that to ensure that the man was in a deep sleep. Edgar opened the closet door and maneuvered around the contents of the closet noiselessly, in a cat-like fashion. Standing next to the bed, careful not to cast a shadow on the man's face from the sunlight peeking in through the window, Edgar was surprised by what he saw. He'd expected to identify the man as Eric's brother, but instead he recognized the man from the picture on the nightstand, Christopher Osborn. He had the same short military standard haircut as he did in the photograph, but there was a hardness in his face, even in sleep, that the boy had not had when the picture was taken. Another difference Edgar noticed almost immediately was located just below the collar of his shirt on the right side. A nasty scar peeked from beneath his shirt that covered his shoulder blade and crept up the side of his neck. It looked to Edgar that it could only have been the product of a burn. While it was possible that the scar could have been covered up by makeup or Photoshop, or even clever lighting at the time the picture was taken, Edgar doubted it. No picture of Chris anywhere in the house showed that scar, not even the one from the beach, in which he wore nothing but a pair of cargo shorts and a bad sunburn. Edgar found himself suddenly frustrated with the boy's arrival. He disliked surprises, but was very frequently able to roll with whatever punch was thrown at him during his vacations. But this was different. Chris's arrival meant that Edgar had lost the bed he'd been excited about, and with no attic or basement, Edgar would have no space in which to move about freely without having to be concerned about detection. He'd done it successfully before, but it was such a nuisance. He considered killing the boy. The family obviously didn't know he was stateside, or else they'd be there to pick him up from the airport, or at least welcome him home, so there would be nobody to know he'd even been home. Eventually, questions would begin to surface like pockets of air beneath a puddle of mud, but Edgar would be long gone before they had time to pop. Resolving to salvage his vacation, Edgar returned to the closet and extracted a wire coat hanger. He twisted the head until it came apart, then straightened the hook on the end. He bent it about 4 inches from the tip at a 45-degree angle. After bending the other side to match, he twisted the whole hanger into a U shape. Unless you had a knife or something with more structural integrity than a coat hanger, reaching someone's brain through the eye socket was a delicate and precise art. What Hollywood often forgot that anatomy books did not was that there was a small hole where the optic nerve ran outside of the eye socket. With precision and practice, both of which Edgar had a proud abundance of, a small item could be inserted through the eye, through the optic nerve, and into the brain. It was quick and didn't make much of a mess, which was something Edgar wanted to avoid. If the boy were smaller, Edgar would have opted to choke him or smother him with a pillow. But Christopher Osborne was quite large for his age and had been trained to handle such situations with deadly force. Edgar wasn't afraid of Chris. On the contrary, he would have relished a good match with the Marine, but he preferred keeping things clean at this juncture. He approached the side of the bed, making minor adjustments to the angle of the bend in the wire with his thin but strong fingers. Chris's breathing began to quicken, and the muscles in his face around the corner of his lips and below his eyes started twitching. It would seem that the misfortune he was about to face in the physical world was manifesting itself in the dream world as well. Edgar had to act fast before the boy's bad dream pushed him from sleep and into the real nightmare that stood before him. Just as Edgar was about to stoop down and line up his shot like a professional pool player, Chris's eyes flew open. Instinctively, Edgar moved to subdue Chris, but stopped himself just before he jumped on top of him. The boy hadn't moved. Edgar had been hovering right above his face, and Chris hadn't moved a muscle. Edgar bent low to examine the boy with a sort of wondrous intrigue. Their noses were almost touching now, and still Chris's blue eyes stared blankly upward, looking more like marbles inside his head than actual eyes. Christopher Osborne was still asleep. Edgar had just remembered the hanger in his hands when Chris opened his mouth and began to scream. The sound that erupted from the boy's throat was a choked, hoarse yell that sounded like his throat was filled with sandpaper. His head began to shake and his limbs flailed as if they were on fire, and he was desperately trying to put it out. Chris's spine arched, like something inside his chest was fighting to escape, and Edgar took a calculated step back, his eyes never leaving the scene before him. The bed frame squeaked as Chris continued to flail, wrapping his sheets around his legs, then kicking desperately to free them. It reminded Edgar of a scene from an exorcism movie. With the hanger still in hand, Edgar returned back to the closet to watch this episode in concealment. With luck, this fit he was having was some sort of seizure that would result in his death. During such fits, it was not uncommon for people to hurt themselves or choke to death. Perhaps fate was smiling upon Edgar once again. Moments later, it was made apparent that Edgar had no such fortune. From the closet with the door left ajar, Edgar watched as Chris suddenly gained complete control of his body and shot straight up. His chest heaved and his forehead glistened with sweat as the boy's wild eyes scanned the room, a look of confused fear buried deep within them. It took only about 7 seconds before recognition and finally calm washed over the boy's face, but Edgar could still see the faint glimmer of fear in his eyes, like light bleeding through your fingertips when holding the front of a flashlight. With palsied hands, Chris reached for his duffel bag on the floor and began digging through its contents. From the bottom of the bag, Chris extracted a thin book bound in leather and tied shut by a strap that wrapped around a black button on the front. Chris unwound the strap and leafed through the book until he found the right page. With a silver pen found in one of the pockets of the bag, the boy began to write in the journal. He wrote furiously at first, like he thought he may burst into flame unless he finishes thought. Then he began to slow. And it was with an intense intrigue, like a child watching a performer in the circus, that Edgar saw silent tears run down the boy's face and splash against the journal's thirsty pages. When he was finished about 20 minutes later, Chris tied the book back up and slid it into the side pocket of his bag with the pen. He then stood up and left the room, closing the door behind him. When he heard the television running and felt confident that he wouldn't be disturbed, Edgar again slipped out of the closet. He worked quickly, not wanting to chance an intrusion. First, Edgar reached under the bed and grabbed his pile of food and other possessions, which he placed in the corner of the closet. They may need to be relocated later, but for now, that was the best place. Next, he approached the duffel bag and reached into the side pocket. He would have liked to have the entire bag to himself to explore, but with Chris down the hall, he would have to be satisfied with the journal for now. As he noticed earlier, the book was bound in leather and kept closed with a thin strap that was wrapped around a black button on the front. It was also embossed with the U.S. Marine Corps logo, an eagle perched atop a globe with an anchor piercing the center of the world, and the Marine Corps motto, Semper Fidelis, just below that. Edgar twisted the strap around and opened to the first page, which was a copy of the logo and motto from the front cover, and at the bottom, written in neat, black ink, red property of PVT, Christopher Osborne, Charlie Company. Edgar licked his thumb and turned to the next page, which was the beginning of the first journal entry. It was written in that same neat handwriting. October 20th, 2015. Dr. Wilkins suggested I try to write things down. He says it will help me express myself in a positive way without having to share with others. I don't know if this will help as much as he says it will, but what I do know is that I have to get these things out of my head. I don't remember much of what happened. I know I was supposed to be on patrol duty the night of the 17th, and I remember going on patrol, but that's where things go blank. Dr. Wilkins says it will take some time to remember exactly what happened, and it's important for me to remember on my own. I can feel the memories in my head, but I can't seem to focus in on any of them. I hope this journal will help, and I hope they let me take visitors soon. As great as they are, I want to see more people than just my doctor and camp psychologist. Edgar stopped reading and slowly thumbed through the rest of the book. Considering the journal was started 6 months ago, there were not many entries. They were at least weekly, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, during the first 3 months, then a big lull in entries in February, with only one short entry for the whole month, then only a handful of entries for March and April. Although he planned on reading it from the beginning, curiosity got the better of him as he thumbed backwards and landed on the short entry from February. It was only 4 sentences. February 12th, 2016. I wish I could forget. Just when I think it's all come back, the nightmares add a new piece. The fucking nightmares. I don't know how much longer I can take this shit. I need to get out of here. Remembering the screaming terror Edgar had just witnessed, it would appear that those nightmares never stopped. A thin smile crossed Edgar's lips as he thumbed back toward the front of the book. These apparently inexorable nightmares would be a compelling field of study, and perhaps offer an opportunity for him to experience something he never had before. He wasn't sure what exactly that may be, but he felt like the end of this vacation would be one for fond recollection for many years to come. Footsteps from the hall pulled Edgar from his reverie. Christopher Osborne entered his bedroom and retrieved his duffel bag. Try as he might, he couldn't seem to keep his mind busy with afternoon talk shows, Judge Judy, or midday infomercials. He found his mind wandering, and when it wandered, it always seemed to find its way back to the one place he didn't want to go. He thought that if he kept his hands busy, his mind would follow suit. Unpacking his bag, finding order and combining his life in the Marines with his life in Bozeman just might do the trick. While he supposed that going through his belongings from the last year may bring to surface the memories of what happened in more vivid detail than he wanted, he hoped that wouldn't happen. In combining his lives, he hoped that he would be able to find peace, knowing that his trials in Afghanistan were over. He had packed the bag with as many fond memories he could fit, so with any luck, the fond memories would lift his spirit up. He carried the bag out to the living room, closing the bedroom door behind him. Even as a kid, Chris preferred keeping the doors of the house closed. He found it kept things quieter, and it felt somehow tidier. He sat down on the couch and dropped the bag at his feet, the four women on the television still cackling like old crows over their four identical cups of coffee, which apparently took two hands to hold. Between listening to them argue over which celebrity they thought was secretly gay and sorting through his duffel bag, Chris doubted his mind would find any room to wander those dark corridors he was trying to avoid. He opened the top of the duffel and began to remove items. Most of the bag was filled with clothing that had been packed into small parcels that the military called Ranger rolls, which was a sort of cross between doing laundry and origami that made each article of clothing take up as little space as possible. He thought for a moment about leaving his clothes that way, then decided against it and began to unwrap the bundles. Although he was quite fond of Ranger rolling, he didn't think there was much of a place for it in the civilian world, and if he was being honest with himself, he knew it would just serve as a reminder of his service, and he'd rather avoid such things. With his clothes folded and neatly pasted in a pile, Chris dug into the bottom of the duffel where the last few personal items rested. He pulled out a small stack of books, their covers bent and spines cracked, and placed them next to the pile of clothes. He'd read each of those books at least 3 times while in Afghanistan. They'd helped to keep him sane during times which insanity seemed to be the only option for peace. He picked up the top book, The Things They Carried, and flipped through its pages fondly. He smiled dimly as the appropriateness of the book's appearance dawned on him while unpacking his bag. He often pondered about the things he carried and what they said about him, what stories they told. Just like the soldiers in the book, he carried books and playing cards, canteens and food rations, a compass and spare clothes. And he also carried the sky, the atmosphere, the dust, the hunger, the love, and the grief. Some of those things he knew he would never be able to stop carrying. He would carry those things with him until the day he died, and he would be buried with them atop his chest. Placing the book back on top of the stack of others, Christopher Osborne continued to empty his bag. He removed a stack of letters bound by a length of twine, dusty playing cards, a few photographs of his family, and one of Teresa Newman, the girl he left behind who had Dear John Ed him 3 months after he was deployed. He went to throw it away so many times he couldn't remember them all, but every time he carried it to the trash or the fire, nostalgia pulled on his heartstrings, and the photograph found its way back to his pocket. She was engaged Bao, to whom Chris didn't know, nor did he care to, yet he still couldn't bring himself to throw it away. He often wondered if that picture had been transformed into some sort of protective talisman, like a child's blanket or stuffed animal, and perhaps that was why he couldn't rid himself of it, regardless of the pain it had caused him to look at it. For now, he tucked it between the other pictures and set them atop the letters. At the bottom of the bag was a pair of boots. Christopher reached in to grab them, then paused briefly, as one pauses just before touching an animal likely to bit them. Then he extended his fingers and grabbed the boots. To anyone else, the boots appeared to be the standard military-issue hiking boot, but what made Chris hesitate wasn't the boots themselves, but the small items tucked into the toes of each boot and buried in several pairs of socks to prevent any rattling sound from escaping them. Those items that resided within his boots were the only things Christopher Osborne did not unpack. They would need to wait until the nightmare that had cut his nap short was a more distant memory. Perhaps tonight or even tomorrow he would find a place for those things he couldn't stand the sight of, but couldn't bear to be without. From the hallway, Edgar watched Chris with a curious gaze. He'd seen the faint hesitation before Chris pulled his boots from the bag, and he knew the look in the boy's eyes as he did so was that of both regret and fear, a combination Edgar was well familiar with and could pick out of a lineup without hesitation. There was something about those boots that held a piece to the broken spirit that now inhabited Christopher Osborne. If he had bothered to look back, he would have seen Edgar standing behind him as he unpacked his bag. Even now, after Edgar had withdrawn from behind the boy to the center of the hallway, all Chris had to do was turn around and Edgar would be made, but he never would. It was as if in a dutiful trance that he busied his hands with emptying his bag, but it was evident that the boy's mind was elsewhere. Edgar hadn't known Christopher Osborne before now, but it would seem that this boy was a mere shadow of the one that left home those months ago.
That's the end of the story. If you have hooked up till here, then hit like button and comment down your views. Also, if you haven't subscribed yet, then do support me by subscribing, so you may not miss any video in future.